Dear guests, welcome back to JCJoyAge International Symposium 2021, Day 3. This is Bridget from JCJoyAge Project. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending where you are joining us from this world. Before we start, I would like to thank our dear speakers for their generosity for allowing us to record today's session and make the resources available online later. So to our audience, you are more than welcome to share this to your colleagues and fellow researchers. Should you have any questions for our speakers, please do not hesitate to type and send us through the chat box anytime during the presentation. We will collect these questions and address them later in the Q&A session. Today, we will delve into the relationship between environment and mental health. We're very honored to have Dr. Shiau-Fang Chao from National Taiwan University and Dr. Yu-Chih Chen from the University of Hong Kong joining us today. Dr. Chao is an associate professor in Department of Social Work, National Taiwan University, and she is an expert in the field of social welfare and services for the elderly, long-term care, and longitudinal data analysis. Today, Dr. Chao will share with us her longitudinal study in environment profile, social participation of community members, and their relationship with depressive symptoms in older adults. Dr. Chao, please.
Okay, I'm back.
Welcome back.
Thank you. Thank you for being patient.
Thank you to our audience.
All right. And good morning and good afternoon, good evening for all of our audience. I'm Shiau-Fang Chao from National Taiwan University, Department of Social Work. Today, I will be presenting my latest work, which is related to the longitudinal association among environment, social participation, and depressive symptoms. And in this study, I particularly concerned older community drawing residents with disability. And these are two of my co-authors. They are both my research assistants who helped collect the T1 and T2 data for this project. And also, I cooperate with the another speaker today, Dr. Yu-Chih Chen, and published this article target using the data collected from long-term care facilities in Taiwan. And I got inspired from this study. So this is why I choose to do the study I'm going to be presenting today.
Hello, Chao. Sorry for interrupting, but I guess maybe I'm not seeing you here. You need to share your slides.
Oh, I'm
just assuming that you're.
Oh, I'm so sorry about that.
Don't worry.
Okay, so can you see my screen right now?
Yes, perfectly. Thank you.
Okay, let's start from the first slide. This is the first slide. And second one, my two research assistants. And here is the article I did with Professor Chen. And as a journalist, we all have theory about what successful agents should be. For example, Rowan can actually develop successful agent framework, which we are all very familiar with. In order to age successfully, we have to minimize our risk of disease and disability. Also, to maintain high level of physical and cognitive functioning and continuously engage in life. But what if a person, especially older person, get disabled in their later life? Does that means their risk of disability has been happened, and it's hard for them to maintain. It's hard for them to maintain their physical functioning, and also their engaged with life will be impacted. Does that mean that their agent will necessary to be successful? Also, the active agent framework also showed us these three pillars are the key that determines whether a person can agent actively or not. But what if their health status decline? For example, they have disability or develop disability, and their participation has been affected. Does that mean that their agent should be inactively? So it seems like the theory in gerontology literature does not provide us enough answer about this question. And social participation in gerontology normally means the involvement in activity among persons or individuals in small society. That means maybe between or among family members, or in large society. That means employment or volunteering, and can foster interaction with others, especially outside the home. This is how gerontology normally defines social participation. But my curiosity or my question is, when people get older, their disability seems that being disabled or the development of disability seems inevitable, and that will largely impact their ability or possibility to participate society. So based on the theory, it seems like their agent would lead to or will be unsuccessfully or inactively. And because of the limitation of the theory, so I turned to the literature in disability and try to find out the answer. What if an older person experiences disabled, and how they achieve their agent like relatively in a decent level or optimize their aging process. And this is the ICF framework. Probably most of you are quite familiar with. And based on the ICF framework, a person's health status is determined by that person's personal factor and the environmental factor. And all these two factors can affect a person's body functions, structure, and their activity or participation. And this will determine that person's health condition. And also, I assume that the mental health status is also a part of the health condition. So the ICF framework has become the conceptual framework of my study, that I assume personal factor and environmental factor will come together and to affect a person's activity and participation, and then also influence that person's mental health condition. And in my study, that would be depressive symptom. And the definition of social participation in the field of disability is kind of different from gerontology. Actually, in disability, social participation actually go beyond the scope of just social interaction or activity participation. ICF actually defines participation as an individual's involvement in their life condition or life situation, and it's also an outcome of interaction among their body functioning, their ability to execute the task or action, and their the person's personal and environmental factor. So social participation in disability actually more emphasized on the accomplishment of that person's preferred activity and valued social role that's defined by that person or that person's culture or social environment. Okay, so let's go back to Taiwan. Based on the latest senior citizen condition survey, which was conducted in 2018, around 30% of the older person in Taiwan had at least one activity ADL disability, and around 28% of them had at least one IADL difficulties. And my assumption for this study is because the increase, we assume that the increased severity of impairment or disability will disrupt older person's ability to the ability of social, the older person's ability to participate in society. And so disability in later life is, with increase of age, is inevitable, and mostly they are irreversible. So the previous research also remind us that the disabled older person actually value social activity than ADL or IDLs. And current program actually spend a lot of effort to try to improve older persons' ability to perform ADL and IDL, but actually they value social activities more. And because in order to perform social activities, they have to have better cognitive functioning, higher social skills. So it's more challenging for them to perform social activity than traditional ADLs and IADLs. So actually disabled older persons, they express more unmet need on social activity. And so my research is going to remind us, is that possible to optimize their well-being status or mental health status through improved social participation, which has been reported the most older person with unmet needs with. And so for this research, we start with the first key concept, which is social participation. To be honest, social participation is very hard to define and measure. For example, when each one of us hear about this term, we all have different imagination in our mind that what it should be. It can be how often you go to see a movie, or do you do physical exercise, or the frequency of doing this activity, or quantity or quality of doing this kind of activity. For some people, maybe social participation means to sit down and have a cup of coffee with your friend. I believe most of us here has been not able to do this for a long time. Okay, so the problem now is SP has been operationalized and measured differently in previous study. It can be leisure, can be outdoor, can be physical, even social or economic activities. So the inconsistency in typology and measurement in previous SP-related research has been made the results hard to compare and hard to make them comparable. So for environment, we also have same problem. Environment is even more challenging to deal with. For example, environment can be objective and subjective. For objective, it can be how many parks in your community, or how many traffic lights, the climate, the weather, the crime rate in your community. And for objective environment, it can be how you perceive your environment. Do you like the weather outside today? Do you think it's hot? It's warm? So for environment, it's very broad and hard to do. Let me share my experience doing that research that I published with Dr. Chen. in that research for long-term care facility, I even count the number of chairs and the tables in a public area in long-term care facility. And I can tell all of you that this is not a significant factor. And luckily, ICF model actually gives us a clue like how to deal with it. Based on ICF, the environment can be barriers and facilitators in 3 major domains, including physical, social, and attitudinal. And for disabled older person, because they spend more time in their home and community, so they are more affected by the environment in their community. And they also experience more environment barrier than their healthier counterparts. And the limitation so far is most of the research doing environment in older population, they all focus on specific domain of the environment. For example, the physical environment, like street condition, the safety, or social environment, the neighborhood cohesion, and also like built environment. And they're not just doing specific domain of the environment. They also just look at one specific type of activity, for example, physical activity. So that's why this study is important, because very little attention has been paid to the SP of older persons with disability, and no study has yet recognized the interrelated dimension and the layers of environment, and put those environment together to see how environment affect the social participation, especially a wide range of social participation activity and depressive symptom. Yet, the longitudinal association among these 3 components has not been investigated yet. So my assumption or hypothesis for this research is, does the environment at T1, means that occur earlier, can affect the social participation transition between wave and affect older persons' depressive symptom that occurred later on. And so for this study, I collect the data, the first wave, I collect 2 wave data. The first wave was collected in 2018, and the other is 2 years later. And I recruit older person aged 60 and above with at least 1 ADL or IADL difficulty, who live in a community. And this study, I use core sampling. All the 358 township on the counties and cities in Taiwan has been stratified into 19 geographical strata. And during my data collection process, I just keep checking my sample in each geographical strata actually mirror or consistent with the distribution of the population. And at last, I have over 300 sample cases in T1 and nearly over 830 cases in T2. And probably most of you might notice that the attrition rate is quite high. Yes, I have an attrition rate over 35%. And I did my best, to be honest. And so if any one of you want to conduct longitudinal data on older person with disability, you have to be careful or aware that attrition rate could be high. And this is just the reality. And for those who drop out, I have 17% of them, they just lost contact or refused to participate the follow-up study. And it said that 10% of them had passed away during this 2-year interval. That means 50 of them. And 5% has been placed to nursing home facilities, and around 3% of them are just so detergent rated and just unable to answer the question anymore. And for the environment factor, I use the 16 questions from the CRED hospital inventory. And this 16 questions, I use factor analysis to factor them into 5 environmental domains. And these 5 domains include physical environment, for example, the climate, the light, and the built environment, and disabled free infrastructure in the community. And also the information, transportation, medical care domain. The third domain is attitude and help from their family. And the fourth domain is attitude and help from community. And the fifth one is the policy or program, the long-term care policy or service programs delivered by nonprofit organization or government in the community. And for this 5-factor environmental factor, I use latent class analysis to group participants into 3 classes or 3 groups and see their pattern in this environment profile. And for the first group of participants, they tend to rate high across the 5 environmental domains. And this account for 34% of my participants. And the second group, they actually rely more on the attitude, and they actually rate high in their attitude and help from their family members and community members. And this accounts for more than half of my sample. And the third group, actually they grade or evaluated low across these 5 environmental domains. And for the social participation, I use the 10 activities developed by JET. I use the social role subscale from the late life functional and disability instrument, which is particularly designed for older person with disability to measure their fulfillment of social roles. And these are the 10 activities I use. Also, I want to look at the prevalency of they do these 10 activities or not between wave. So I choose the 830 cases with both T1 and T2 data and compare their change of the change in prevalency of performing this activity. And as you can see from this table, for this 2-year interval, the same group of population, they have significantly declined in physical exercise, religious activity, and go out with others, then invite others to home. So for this 10 activity, if they want to withdraw or withdraw from, it seems like this 4 activity could be the first 4 that they decide to give up. And then I also did latent class analysis on this 10 activity and to see the pattern of my participant in performing this 10 activity. And as you can see from this graph, for like nearly 40% of my participants, they actually perform almost every activity. except for a little bit lower in volunteering and active recreation. And for the other group of them, they did very high in the first three activities, including visiting others and inviting others to home or going out with others. And for the last group of participants, they actually did nothing, means zero prevalence of doing this. Zero prevalence, they almost did nothing, except for a little bit of them invite others to their home. And for the T2 activity, I also did latent class analysis. And again, you can see the same pattern at T2. But also, I can divide my participants into three groups. But the percentage of belongingness in each group or class actually change a little bit. For the high SP class, actually the percentage of belonging to this group actually decline or decrease a little bit. And the percentage of belonging to the low SP class increase at T2. So for this table, I did latent transition analysis, which is a longitudinal version of latent class analysis. This analysis tells us the probability of respondents who transit from one SP class to the other SP class from T1 to T2. So as you can see from this table, the respondent actually showed a quite stable trend that they have more than 50% of probability of staying in the same SP profile over time. That means low to low, moderate to moderate, and high to high. But there are a sizable portion of the respondent. They have a tendency of moving upward. That means like 20 or 30% of them, they actually move from low to moderate or to high, or moderate to high SP profile over time. And then I also check T1 environment and the association between T1 environment and the change in SP profile status. And this is odd ratio. So the coefficient above 1 means more likely, and less than 1 means less likely, lower than 1. Okay, so you can see this purple text. Those in a more supportive or more facilitative environment, they actually, this group of persons actually more likely to stay in a more active SP profile over time. And for those in a more supportive environment at T1, they also less likely to stay in less active SP profile over time, and less likely to move down from high to low SP profile. And this is the cross-sectional relationship among the three components I look at. And for the T1 environment profile, we can see that those in a more supportive environment, they have a higher probability of belonging to high SP or moderate SP profile, like more active profile at T1. They also experience fewer depressive symptoms. Also, those participants in more active SP profile, they also enjoy fewer depressive symptoms, even controlling for environment profile. And for longitudinal relationship, we didn't observe the direct linkage between T1 environment profile and the T2 depressive symptom. But we did see a transition in SP membership affect T2 depressive symptom. For example, in the purple text, those stay in an active SP profile like moderate to moderate or high to high. They had significantly fewer depressive symptoms at T2. And for this blue text, if they move upward from low to moderate or moderate to high, they also reported fewer depressive symptoms at T2. So what do we learn from this study? The first part we learned from the environment profile is environment is just one single domain. All these 5 dimensions of environment are interrelated, and the people tend to rate consistently high or low across these 5 domains. So they are just linked together. And if we want to know or investigate the influence of environment, we have to look at all these tangible, intangible, social, and service, and attitudinal, and also physical environment. And for the lesson we learned from the SP profile analysis is also for these 10 activities, people tend to consistently perform high or low in these 10 activities. So this gives us clue that maybe if we can promote one particular activity that value or meaningful or highly motivated by the person, we will have a possibility that can transfer this positive experience to the other activity and try to help that disabled other person move upward or move toward in a more active lifestyle. And for the other part of SP profile, it also demonstrates that being disabled is not the end of life. Actually, for disabled person, they have their own activity prevalence. They are heterogeneity. They have different lifestyle, and they are considerably, they are a sizably group of person. They do not withdraw from society because of being disabled. They actually are relatively robust against the constraint of disability and still live with an active lifestyle. And for the cross-sectional relationship, we can see that high supportive environment can directly benefit fewer depressive symptoms. This is a direct path, but there's also an indirect path from high supportive environment to high social participation and then linked to fewer depressive symptoms. But for longitudinal relationship, actually, the first lesson we learned is a sizable tendency, a sizable portion of the participant, they're actually quite stable over time. Their social participation pattern is quite stable. And nearly 20 to 30% of them have the potential to shift upwards. And for environment profile at T1, high facilitative environment that occurred earlier can actually help, not directly link to fewer depressive symptoms 2 years later. It actually helps older person to remain in a more active SP crisis or train wave and over time, and then benefit their depressive symptom later on. So for the implication of my study, the first implication is those influence of a wide range of environment or multiple SP activities should be considered simultaneously. And also intervention or service should be developed in a more preventive perspective. Let's say you have to support their meaningful and valued activities that can help them accomplish their social role or across different life area, and then combine this service or intervention with to develop a more supportive or friendly environment. The combine of these two components can be more effective or can optimize the mental health of disabled older persons in the community. And that positive effect is not just occurred or happened right now. It can last 2 years later. And the other implication is the environment and the social participation condition can be developed or included in a risk screen tool. That for now, if you see an older person experience lots of environmental barriers and has extremely low social participation, that means that person's depressive symptom or mental health status will be damaged or be impacted, not for now, but also in the future. And so this is probably most of my presentation, and these are the reference I used in this study. And this is, I think I should start here first, and then if you have any question, please welcome to ask at the Q&A section.
Right. Thank you, Dr. Chao. Your study based on the ICF framework opened us to think wider and consider the roles of environment and social participation for mental health in older adults, and giving us a very attentive view of the heterogeneity of the older adults' lifestyle. And now let's move on to Dr. Chen's talk. Dr. Yu-Chih Chen is an assistant professor in the Department of Social Work and Social Administration at the University of Hong Kong, and his research focuses on social determinants of healthy aging, with an emphasis on how economic, environmental, and social and productive behavioral factors shape well-being and health in later life. And today, he will talk about interactions between neighborhood characteristics, activity engagement, and health among community-dwelling older people. Dr. Chen, please.
Okay, thank you. And thanks, Bridget, for promoting me to associate professor. Thanks so much. Okay, so let me share about my slide. Just want to double check. So can you see my slide now? Yes. Okay, so let me continue. Hi everyone, my name is Yu-Chih Chen. So normally it is good morning, good afternoon, or good night for you. Thanks for attending this conference. And today I'm going to share about my research focus on environment, activity engagement, and also health outcomes among community drawing older adults. So as Bridget mentioned, that my research is focused on social determinant of healthy aging. So my research focuses on different factors like environment, like activity engagement, or productive engagement, or even economic financial factors. So today I'm going to share about a little of part of my work that focusing on discussing this relationship. So I want to begin my talk by mentioning about what is health. So according to World Health Organizations, that when we define health, we define that health is a state of complete physical, social, and also mental well-being. So when we talk about health, we talk about the complete and also the intact status of health. So it's not just merely the absence of disease or infirmity. So of course that when we talk about health, we talk about two aspects. The one aspect is about their body, and the other aspect is about their mind. And of course that when we talk about health, we need to think about what would be the enabling factors, what would be the correlate or the determinant that either strengthening or optimizing the health. So here that I want to introduce you a framework that has been used widely, particularly in the social work field. So that theory is called ecological perspective, or so-called person in environment perspective. That means from the figure, you can see that our health either measured at the individual or population level could be affected or could be kind of influenced by different layer of systems. In that, it may include genetic factors, something related to our gene, our chromosome, or it could be related to individual risk factors, or even social relations that we are working or entangling with different ecosystems, like our family, our friends, our relative. Even it is engaged with broader contexts that may include like a neighborhood and also community systems, and also that broader contexts like social and economic policies can also shape and also affect our health. So as you can see that from these figures that different layers may interact and then codependent together, linking with time, and then becoming a feedback loop. So from this theory, we know that both health is both affect and also is affected by multiple level of influences. And here that it's the active engagement is matter because activity can be referred to engagement in either individual level, community level, neighborhood level, or even social structure level. And on the other hand, that our health is also both shapes and also it's also shaped by the environment, both can be measured socially and physically. So another thing is that we have known that different layer of system or different factors can contribute to health. So what would be the key factors that can really determine the health in later life? So we can always go back to the medical and also scientific field to find the answers. So here I just share two different framework that in the medical field. So these two frameworks, although they are 10 years apart, but still they yield very similar information. So at the left-hand side, it's actually the determinant of health measured at the population level. And the right-hand side is the determinant to specific health outcome, which is measured by premature deaths. So overall, you can see that many of people think about what determines health. We may always go to genetic predispositions, right? But if we see these figures, we know that the genetic conditions only account probably 1/3 of the variances. That means about 70% of variances is actually explained by other factors. So what would be these other factors represent? This other factor represent either social circumstances, environment exposure, healthcare systems, and also behavioral patterns. So from these two figures, we can see that, okay, it's probably pinpoint some promising modifiable factors that can contribute to health. So in my study, I am calling out for two specific mechanisms, with one focusing on active engagement, and the other is focusing on the environment exposure. Because from the figures we have seen in the previous slides that, about even half, 50% of the variances can be contributed or can be attributed to these two different domains. So let me go back to the first one, activity engagements. So when we talk about active engagement, it actually can be defined broadly that represents different activities. So for example, that activity can be referred to as physical activity, like doing exercise. So as you can see that from the pictures, older adults may doing Tai Chi or doing other type of exercise in order to strengthen or maximize their physical well-being. And also activity can be referred to social aspect, like we are meeting someone or having engaging frequent contact with our friends, with our relatives. And also active engagement could be referred to as leisure activity or for entertainment purpose, like the picture shows in here that some older adults, they are playing cards or playing mahjong. And lastly, activity could be referred to as productive engagements, that including either caregiving, working, or volunteering. So as you can see that there are diverse forms of active engagement that older adults, that people can engage in. And the other is the environment. So as Dr. Chao mentioned that environment can be measured both objectively and subjectively. So when we talk about environment, we are talking about, in my study, I'm more talking about objective features. So something like aging-friendly physical environment, like a community or in neighborhoods that offer good quality of outdoor space, like offer easy access transportations or affordable housing or good quality of housing environment, etc. And also environment can be defined from the social perspective that a community can offer supportive facility or infrastructure like social and healthcare centers. So in here that in this study, I'm going to focus on these two major drivers on health. But before talk about that, we need to understand about there do have variations in both activity engagement and also environment. So taking activity as an example, we know that people can and do engage in different type of activity. So from here, from this picture, we can see that you can do jogging, you can do dancing, you can meet people, you can do meditations, you can work, you can read. So people can and do engage in different activity simultaneously. However, when we do these activities, this activity is being shaped or being influenced by a series of factors. These factors may including our preference or our choices, even by the opportunities or the constraint. So for example, a healthy older adult living in a community can engage in multiple activities, whereas an older adult, if he or she has disability, then he or she may have limited choices in terms of activity engagement. So of course that when we study activity engagement, we have to understand about the heterogeneity in terms of these activities. The other is talk about environment. As I mentioned before, that active environment can be defined either physically or socially. And also environment can refer to the context that where we are living. So on the picture, you can see that we can live in different contexts, like living in urban area, living in rural area, also living in suburban area. And this living context may definitely have different implications on health. For example, urban area that may enjoy a better infrastructure in such as better access to healthcare, better access to transportation, which this kind of resources may not be very feasible in a rural area. So of course that when we study these two components, we need to think about the variations both in activity engagement and also in a broader context measured by the environment. So here are the basic questions that we have to consider when we study about this effect on health. The first is that do activity cluster in meaningful way, because when we do activities, that some activity can be clustered together simply based on our preference, on the opportunity, or by our options. So this different cluster of activities will have different impact on health accordingly. And secondly, that what would be the mechanism that connecting activity and health in later life? So from the other perspective, talk about environment, we have to think about do physical and social environment predict health? And then whether the importance of physical and social environment on health vary by different contexts. In here, I refer to as urban and rural contexts. So in this presentation, I hope I can unfold about this association by using the public available data from both China and the US to answer these questions. So in here, I'm going to introduce two of my study with one focus on activity engagement. So in that, I'm going to show you that how do activity engagement affect multiple aspects of health that could be measured both physically, mentally, and also cognitively. And specifically, I want to talk about the mechanism that connecting activity engagement and health in later life. And this type of study is from the US data. And the other study is from the Chinese data. In that, I'm going to talk about how does physical and social environment can affect mental health more specifically, and how do this effect could be varied by different urbanicity levels. So let me go back to my first study, talk about activity engagement. So this would be the study I published on the Gerontologist, where it's mentioned about the effect of activity engagement in later life. But before talk about this kind of effect, let me give you some background information about activity engagement. So theoretically speaking, that why activity matters is because that active engagement is central to many models of healthy aging. So as Dr. Chao's presentation mentioned that successful aging mentioned the importance of engagement. So continued engagement with life is matter in terms of us to achieve a better, healthy, quality aging life. And of course, that another framework proposed by World Health Organization, Active Aging Framework, also mentioned about different factors can contribute to health. In that, it's mentioned about health and social services, behavioral determinants, personal determinant, physical environment, social determinant, and also economic factors. They are all contribute to health in later life. So if we see this framework more carefully, we will see that these different factors, they are not standing alone. They can be codependent or coordinated with other factors. So when these factors, they are interactive in a way, they are working together, they can contribute to healthy aging. But overall, when we see these two frameworks, we can see the importance of the active engagement because it's mentioned about the importance of engaging in activities and how does that affect health in later life. So it goes to another stage of the question, which is that since activity engagement is so important, how do we measure it empirically? So from the kind of current evidence, there are different ways that we can measure activity. The first is the most easy one, which we treat each activity as a single activity, and we measure or assess the effect from that single activity. But this approach isn't very make sense, right? Because when we engage in activities, we can engage in multiple ones, but not just the only one. So this approach may not be very feasible. So in the current evidence that we tend to measure different activity in the same time. So we have another way is that we combine different activity. So it comes with an assumption that we believe that each activity, they have equal weight. But we know that different activity may have different implication on health. So when we combine them together, probably we will distort the view on activity engagement. So there is a promising way or a growing trend that focuses on active engagement by using the cluster approach, which I will offer you an example on that illustration. But the cluster approach is to identify the tendency or the intensity in a wider range of activity, and we can identify the groups based on the active engagement on a wider range of activity. So what would be the evidence currently in the literatures that connecting activity to health? So basically speaking, that the literature have identified that if we engaging in activities, it's going to lead to different health outcomes, that including better physical functioning, better psychological well-being, better cognition, or even lower mortality rates. So here would be the evidence that currently we get. And also there are a lot of ample evidence that support the direct function from activity engagement to health. But it comes a very important question, that is, what is the pathway that connecting activity to health in later life? So in my study, I am proposing that the relationship between activity engagement and health is through so-called the nature or the quality of activity engagement. And this is based on a theory called the social model of health promotion. In this theory, it suggests that the relationship between activity engagement and health is through physical, cognitive, and also social pathway. So what does that mean? That means when we do activities, this activity can stimulus or really exercise different part of body functions. So let me give you examples. Think about we are doing reading activities, and we can when we read the books, we can read it alone or read it in a group. And this different context may bring different implication on health. So for example, when we are reading book alone, we may only exercise our cognitive function, because when we read books, we may think about the content on the book, or we are trying to think about, think about the content, or making reasoning, or doing anything related to cognitive ability. So of course that when we read the book alone, it's only exercise our cognitive functions, which it will be very different if we are reading the books in a group where we can discuss the book content with our peers, with our friends. So of course that when we are in a reading book, we are not when we are in a reading group, we are not only exercise our cognitive function, but also exercise our social functioning. So of course that when we are engaging in activities, it can have different implications through physical, cognitive, and also social pathway. And this kind of different functioning, they are very interactive and they are also very dynamic. So my study is going to unfold the mechanism by using the nature or the quality of engagements. So particularly the mediation effect of the nature of engagement in connecting active engagement and health in later life. So in here, I want to mention about some research gaps. So currently that we don't have many evidence focus on the cluster nature of active engagement. And secondly, that we only focus on the direct effect, not the mechanisms, which is the inspiration on the nature of engagement. So here comes the research question. The first is that what would be the cluster nature for both active engagement and the nature of engagement? And secondly, how does the nature of engagement link between active engagement and health in later life? So in order to answer these research questions, I'm using the data from the United States called the Health and Retirement Study. So in here, I'm using 2010 and 2012 as two time points and linking with another data set called Consumption and Activity Meal Survey. So as you can see that it's created a 3 time point order that linking from 2010, 11, and 12. So after merge with this three type point of data, the final sample would be roughly 6,000 observations over 51 and older. So here will be the design for my study. As you can see that I'm focused on the 2012 health outcomes, and I kind of explore 3 different types of health outcomes that including physical health, mental health, and cognitive health. And this health is regressed on a series of 2010 covariate to create a clear time order. And this effect is being mediated by so-called activity and also activity nature of activity engagement. And they are from the 2011 CAMS data. So for measuring activities, I'm using 33 different items that covering different aspects of health, that including physical, productive, leisure, social, and other activities engagement. In terms of nature engagement, as from the theory, we know that we can exercise our physical, cognitive, and social functioning. So in here, I'm using 4 different indicators to represent our nature of engagement, that including physical, cognitive, and also social engagement. So here will be the research design. So next, I want to mention about what is activity clusters. So think about we have 2 hypothetical individuals, Jennifer and Kevin, and they are doing activity in this activity simultaneously. They can do reading, exercise, working, and meeting. And these numbers representing the intensity or the preference they engage in activities. So of course that these 2 individuals, they engage in activity in the same time, but they do have their preference or their choices. So taking Jennifer, for example, we know that Jennifer, she loves to read and also she loves to meet people. So of course that she will have more intensity on this activity. In contrast, Kevin, who is more likely to engage in activity like exercise or working. Okay, so of course that when they are doing these activities, they will bring different level of nature of engagement, because Jennifer is doing activity like much more pro-social. So of course that she's working more on the social aspect of functioning, but of course that Kevin working more on the physical functioning. So here comes the empirical computations. So if we just combine them together by summing all the activity engagement and also the nature of engagement, we will identify that they have very similar level of active engagement and also the same level of the nature of engagement. But we know that it's not true, right? Because Jennifer is much a more pro-social person, whereas Kevin is a physical driven person. So if we just combine them together, we are going to distort the view on these two important constructs. So in my study, I'm going to use cluster approach to identify the people by putting them into different clusters. And this model is called the mixture model. So I'm going to go very quickly, and if you have any questions, please we can exchange during the Q&A sessions. But in order to identify the people into different clusters, I'm using factor mixture models. In here, I'm using 33 different items and then group into different factors. And then based on these factors, I identify different latent class for their active engagement. And same logic applies to the nature of engagement. So for the analysis, because I'm testing mediation result, so in here I'm using two types of analysis. One is multinomial logic regression, and the other is linear regression. And these two types of analysis was combined using the Tofiki and McKinnon method to produce the 95% confidence interval to check the existence of mediation effect. So let me show you about the profile of activity engagement first. So as you can see that I have 9 different activity factors. They represent personal leisure, civic engagement, interior, exterior household chores, physical exercise, and also community leisures. So based on these different factors, I can plot or categorize people into different clusters. So the first group of people, you can see that they have higher engagement or higher intensity in terms of physical exercise, exterior chores, or employment. So because of this kind of characteristic, I decide to label these people as working people because these people tend to be very active in terms of this kind of physical demanding exercise, physical demanding activity. So using the same logic, I can label another people to represent high active engagement in all of the aspects of activity engagement. And the other is kind of moderate because it's engaged at a moderate level in terms of this activity factors. And the others represent passive leisure. So for this group of people, you can see that this group of people tend to engage more on personal leisure and also manage medical bill. So after double check about these populations, these people kind of gradually develop some disability in their later life. And lastly is the most inactive activity people that they are really low on everything except for using the internet. So overall that we can identify these 5 different profiles from the community samples. And the other is the nature of engagements. So using the same logic, we can identify one group of people. They are really engaged in active engagement. They are fully used their cognitive, physical, and also their social functioning. But of course, that we have another group of people. They are really engaged low in terms of activities. So they didn't fully use their physical, social, and also cognitive functions. And the other group that we find out that they exercise their cognitive function and also physical functions, but they are relatively low on their social function. So based on these figures, I'm going to do multivariate analysis. So here is the analysis. So from here, that we can see that activity cluster engagement is really affect our health. And more specifically that the nature of engagement needed the relationship between physical, mental, and cognitive health. So as you can see that if the complex interval, they are listed in parentheses, that means we do have significant outcomes. So it's really validated the analysis or the theory that the nature of engagement matter between the active engagement and health in later life. So one thing I want to point out is that even though that you are really not very active in terms of active engagement, if you will be able to exercise your body function physically, cognitive, or socially, you can still have good physical health from the community sample. So what would be the discussion for the implication from this study? One thing is that engaging in activity with high intensity and better quality will definitely lead to better health in later life. And also the nature of engagement mediate the relationship between academic engagement and health in later life. So here will be the implication from my study. The first one is that it is offer us that probably promoting some ideal activity could be feasible to further strengthen older adults' health. So there are some ideal activity like volunteering, civic engagement that can really strengthen or really encourage older adults to exercise different body functions, either cognitively, socially, or physically. And secondly is that we have to pay attention to some population at risk. For example, if you are really low in terms of active engagement, then probably there are some community efforts or there's some program effort we should be targeting them in a way to specifically lift or engage them in the activity engagement. And also it's mentioned about the role of environment. Think about if we can offer some inclusive environment to foster meaningful engagement, particularly for the older adults who are really low engaged in activities, by provide a stimulus environment, then probably can help them to promote health of these low engaged older adults in a way in order to strengthen their health in later life. So I want to share another study focused on the exposure of the community environment, also published on the gerontologist. So in here, I want to mention about some paradigm first. So we can go back to the paradigm that proposed by WHO, which refers to aging-friendly community, aging-friendly cities. So in that, it talked about different factors, including transportations, housing, social participation, outdoor spaces, community support, and health services. But we have to see that it's a kind of changing in a bit, because the framework is changing from aging-friendly cities to aging-friendly city and community, because we know people are living in different contexts, that they may live in urban, living in suburban or even rural areas. So that's why WHO changed the framework a bit in order to foster different contexts. So the evidence has suggested that neighborhood stressor or neighborhood characteristic is really affect mental health of older adults. So for example, if the neighborhood have really low or poor socioeconomic status, like they don't have really supportive or enough money or enough facility to help older adults engage in a way, and also the deterioration of the physical environment, availability or inaccessibility of healthcare facilities, or even lack of amenity or social physical active engagement. These factors, this correlated has been shown that is really correlated with poor mental health. In contrast, there are some factors associated with good mental health, like a supportive physical and also social environment. So I want to introduce another theoretical framework, which is called the neighborhood stress process model. So from here, you can see that neighborhood characteristic is really influence health, mental health, either directly or indirectly. So by using this method, I'm going to ask two questions. The one question is that how do neighborhood characteristics affect mental health in later life? And does this effect vary by urban and rural contexts? So in order to answer this question, I'm using data from China, health and longitudinal study, and I'm using 2 time points to construct my design. So as you can see that I am regress my health outcomes on a series of aging-friendly features that including physical environment and also social environments. And in this, the factor including outdoor space, transportation, housing facilities, amenities, social organizations, and also healthcare centers. So the analysis, in order to answer my question, I'm using multi-level analysis and also lag model. So here is the result to show the aging-friendly features in both rural and urban areas. So as you can see that there are very significant differences in terms of these aging-friendly features. As you can see that urban area compared to rural area have better built environment in terms of easy access transportations, better housing, or even supportive facility, like they offer more healthcare system, or they offer more senior associations. So of course that they will bring different implications on health. So this kind of differences can be observed in the multivariable analysis. But overall, my analysis shows that both physical and mental, both physical and also social environment can affect mental health of older adults, particularly that if environments have full developed physical infrastructures like good quality outdoor space, easy access transportations, good quality of good housing environment, and also supportive social environment like offer healthcare and also social care facilities, older adults are going to have or observe good mental health eventually. And also, this kind of effect is varied by urban-rural context, where we see that rural areas affected more by the physical environment, and also urban area affected more by the social areas, social environment. So what would be the implication? That one thing we have to pay attention is to focus on program development. So if we can offer more budget or resources to build a comprehensive, supportive physical and also social environment, it's going to further strengthen older adults mentally, based on my study. So in my study, I have introduced that the effect from active engagement and also from the neighborhood. So what would be the lesson that we can learn from this study? The first thing is that developing policy and program to maximize engagement for older adults, that meaningful engagement in certain activity is very important, because we know that this activity can shape and also affect health either directly or indirectly. And also there are calls to kind of encourage fund investment in order to further build comprehensive, supportive, aging-friendly features in our living environment. So if we can do this way, that from the policy and also from program perspectives, it's going to promote our health in later life. And also, of course, that producing knowledge on this different domains is also very important. So from study that there are different antecedents that help us to modify. So in here, I'm proposing that we can do to modify our health through activity engagement and also environment from a policy program perspective. So as I mentioned before, that if we can have more resources to focus on program development, then it's going to beneficial our health in later life. But of course that this program development can be limited by a series of factors like ageism, like if we have ageism attitude, we believe that older adults, they are slow, they are inactive, then of course that we are going to build a program that which is not effective, or even we may have programs that not tailor the needs of older adults. And also that if we don't coordinate different factors using a comprehensive network, then we are only, it's just like not seeing the forest for the trees. We are only using one factor to try to modify health without working with other sectors. So in this presentation, I just present a small proportion of my work. And I want to have a general invitation to you that thank you so much for attending this conference. And I want to invite you to join in the workforce that we can work together to build a aging-friendly community that working on different sectors that including finance, healthcare, family, housing, transportation, so that we can achieve better health in later life. So this kind of wrap my presentation, and I look forward to the comments and also questions from the audience. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Chen. We're all very impressed and inspired by your efforts trying to elucidate the mechanism that connects activity participation and health, and how community and neighborhood context can shape older adults' behavior and well-being, and in addition, the advanced statistical models that you do. Well, now let's open the floor to our audience to raise questions. I can see questions pulling in. First of all, we have a question for Dr. Chao. Dr. Chao.
I have to apologize that every single time when I turn off my camera, I cannot turn that on again. So please allow me to log out again and log in back, and I'll be right back.
Okay.
Then you will be able to see me.
Okay.
Sorry about that.
Don't worry about it. All right, since that, I think we have a question raised earlier for Dr. Chen, which considers the measurement for activity. So in the presentation, you mentioned about 33 items of activity. So the question is how to measure and what is the tool used to measure the activity engagement, for instance, social, cognitive, etc.
Okay, yep. So in order to capture this activity, so I'm using different examples. So for example, in terms of product engagement from the literatures, there are different activities that we can use, like caregiving, volunteering, or working, right? So in terms of leisure activities, I'm using like reading books, like, like talking to someone. So based on different dimension, different type of activities, I just combine that in a way. So when I combine this active engagement together, one thing we can do is that we can sum it up. But as I mentioned earlier, that if we sum each activity together, we assume each activity, they are equal weight, they are equal importance. But we know that some activity, they are much more ideal, such as product engagement, working, volunteering, they may have more health benefit. So in my study, I'm using cluster approach, try to identify different clusters based on different type of active engagement. So that's why you can see the 5 different typologies of active engagement using a sample from the US.
Thank you for the very clear and comprehensive answer to that. And coming to the measurement issue, there's also a question for Dr. Chao regarding the measurement. Yet the audience said it might not be quite relevant, but then they are seeking your professional idea on how do you think of, or if you have heard of any measurement for social integration. So is there any recognized way to measure it? Thank you.
I think there are a couple of interchangeable concepts, not interchangeable, but related concepts. For example, social integration, social cohesion, and the social inclusion. So for me, the social integration would be more like a combine of activity engagement and the sense of community. For example, how many activities that you participate, like outdoor in the community. And the other part is how much you sense that you belong to this community or you are familiar with the members of this community or the activity or the resources in this community. So for me, social integration is more like a combine of these two concepts. And I would suggest that for me, if I want to investigate a new concept, I will just check the literature and select the measures that are reliable and valid, especially has been tested on the population that I'm going to survey. So I think a good start is to look at different possible measures first, and then to select the valid and reliable measures that have been used or tested in your sample.
Thank you, Dr. Chao. I noticed one thing in both your presentation is that you both have a really strong theoretical framework. So that helps to guide you forming your research question and then select the appropriate measurements for answering your questions. And here we have a question for Dr. Chen. So the audience said, thank you for your presentation. Your studies of such a macro scope. And how do you pick the environmental factors and questions and domains to be focused among all?
Okay, so thanks for this question. So as Dr. Chao mentioned in the environment can be defined broadly, that including objective and subjective. So in my study, I'm focusing more objective part. And in that, I am refers to WHO's aging-friendly community framework. In that, they represent or they urge researchers to use 8 domain of dimensions, that including social participations, transportations, engagement, something, etc., something like that. So of course, that when we talk about this aging-friendly community framework, this definition, this measurement would be varied by the context. Either you are living in the developed or developing context. So in my study, I'm using China as a case example because we know that China is a largest developing country. So of course, that when we examine this kind of aspect, the factors would be very different than some variable measured in the developing countries. So in my study, for example, when I measure outdoor space, if you see about the data in Chao's, let me just go back to my slide and then give more information. So in terms of outer space, I'm using the type of road, or even whether you have public restrooms, the days of road that are not passable, something like that. In terms of transportations, I'm using the number of bus line and also the waiting time as a proxy to measure transportation. In terms of housing built environment, I'm using whether the community have sewer systems, have waste management systems, the days with electricity. In terms of social environments, I'm using like, do they offer any health care centers, social care centers? So these indicators, if we put in the developed countries, which will be using a whole different set of variables, because the variable I'm using is from the Chinese developing context. So that's why I'm using these indicators in my research.
Thank you very much. So Dr. Chen, this is another question related to your study. So regarding the study on activity engagement and health, the audience is wondering if it is possible to use the 3 time points in the HRS data as a longitudinal analysis so that we may see if the changes in activity pattern will affect participants' health. And since the patterns of activity engagement are data-driven and some completely different patterns may emerge in another time point. So would there be any ways to deal with this kind of hypotheses now?
Of course, so thank you so much for asking these questions from the audience. So from my understanding is that HRS in the US, they offer a bunch of measures in active engagement. So in my study, I only focus on 1 time point. But from Professor Zhao's presentation, you can see that she's using latent transition analysis to see how activity can change from 1 time to the other. So using the same idea that you can use the HRS, because they are using different time point. If you're using CAMS data, it's starting from 2005 and it's kind of surveyed by every 2 years. So the latest wave for the CAMS should be 2017. So you can use as many data points, time point as you wish to see how activity can be changed from one time to the other. So it is very feasible and very likely that you can do research like that.
Cool. I'm sure the audience will be excited to try that out. I have a question regarding different kind of data that you use, because in Dr. Chen's study, you used HRS and then Chao's data set. And Dr. Chao, in your study, you also mentioned about using big data sets and also some of the data that you actually collected for your own studies. So I'm wondering, because we're in a really data savvy era, there are numerous data we can dive into. And do you have any tips for young emerging researchers in the field who are considering perhaps collecting their own data or choosing between the existing big data sets? And do you have any tips for emerging researchers who want to just dive into different big factors that we want to see in the interconnections in between them. So any of you can perhaps say something about your own studies or your own experiences in this process.
Okay, let me do that first. I actually attend the day one section, like the presentation done by Professor Martin and Professor Terry Long. And Professor Martin actually mentioned about how important to collect the data, especially big data, to do analysis on the healthy agent. And that reminds me that to share the experience in Taiwan with you, that we are actually have community service center. We have over, probably now it's over 3,000 community service center providing greeting service or health promotion service for older person in Taiwan, not disabled only. And start from this year, we are trying to build up a system to collect the information of this service user. And probably next year or 2 years later, we will have possibility that we can have enough information, stable and comprehensive enough to do big data analysis on those group of users. And we are going to have a potential that we can link the information of this user to their healthcare insurance and the long-term care usage data, and to see how's the influence of community service and long-term care or health cost. This is one trend. And for the past 1 year, I also did some research on this kind of big data analysis, use government administrative data. But the reality is administrative data or existing data set, for example, these kind of secondary data, they have their own limitation. There's some very new concept or very core concern that the investigators interested in will probably not exist or not perfectly reflect the concept you want. And in that case, probably the result from big data analysis or secondary data analysis can be a guideline or a start point that can guide the researcher that something just does not exist in current data set. So you have to develop your own data. So for me, both kind of data collection approach or research approach has their own value. And for those who collect their own data, of course, it's hard, especially during the COVID-19 pandemic, during doing any kind of face-to-face or questionnaire research. It's just difficult. And normally the sample, the structure of the sample is not that perfect as big data, because the big data is population itself, and the secondary data as well, like the sample distribution is always perfect. So they have pros and cons, and depends on your use or your concern, and they all have advantages and disadvantages, but it all worth to give a try if you have a idea that you want to investigate. That's my suggestion.
Yeah, so I just want to echo what Professor Chao has mentioned. So basically my training is focused on secondary data, administrative data analysis. So when I kind of doing my research using this public data, available data source, I have one for conceptual thinking. So this secondary data, they are really feasible, they're available, but many times when I do research, I just see myself, I'm kind of a gold miner, because I am trying to identify the gold from this data. So of course that in order to identify the two key concept that you want to research, one thing that you have to know is that your conceptual framework should be very clear. So I'm offering one example. So I want to do a cross-national comparison using data from South Korea, from China, and also from the US by comparing productive engagement. In here, I'm refers to volunteering, caregiving, and also working. They are very easy access, easy defined variables. But when I do the research, I just identify there are challenges associated with the use of this data set. Because although that this definition are very clear, they are easy to operationalize. However, each country will operationalize volunteering, caregiving very differently. So for example, in the US, when they define caregiving, they are referred to as spousal caregiving because I'm taking care of my spouse, or it refers to like kind of parental caregiving. But if we study caregiving in the Chinese context, it can refer to either parental caregiving, even grandchild caregiving, which is very different, between the Chinese and US society. And when we talk about caregiving in the South Korea settings, they measure caregiving using ADL function screening first. So that is caregiving for the disability. So when you do secondary data analysis, of course, that you have to notice that some measurement conceptually are very, very different. So of course, that you have to keep in mind that remember this kind of things carefully so that you can select the most appropriate variables when you do the analysis. And the other is related to much more hardcore technique, which is that we are working with secondary data usually involve really large sample size of different time point. So of course that we need some training like statistics, like merging data, like data structure management, something like that. So this would be my experiences like from the both conceptual and also statistical empirical perspectives.
Wow, thank you both for your generosity, sharing your own personal experiences. We have more questions pulling in, but I guess we can only accommodate one more and then pick this question because it kind of addresses Dr. Chen's call in the very end about the vision kind of society you want to build. So both of you can try to tackle this question. So from your experiences, what's the atmosphere of promoting active aging on policy level, like in the society that you live in currently? And what are some of the tricks in engaging different stakeholders, if you have any personal stories to share on this point?
Well, I guess this is a very challenging and hard question. So I always see myself as a scholar. So as a scholar, my duty is to produce scientific evidence so that it can guide some program or policy development. So from my study, I'm more focusing on the environment and also active engagement. And from a study, it shows that if we can improve environment, we can design activity in a way that help older adults to engage meaningfully in different aspects of life, then it's going to beneficial to their health eventually. So I hope that I'm using this kind of piece of evidence to kind of working with other sector. Of course, that politics is very important. So I hope that politics can see my efforts so that they can trying to move in some mountains in a way so that we can have more policy or program being developed that we can further strengthen our environment or further strengthen our active engagement. And of course, there are other stakeholders like community engagement, community organizations, workers in there. So yeah, but I see that my study is kind of serving at the front end and then just providing evidence for other kind of stakeholders for them to use. But I don't know whether Professor Chao has the same view or have different views on that.
Oh, this is a hard question to answer. Okay, actually, if you see the active agent index developed by mostly from Europe, United Nations, or European. Actually, those index are mostly regional level. For example, the percentage of older population who are like employed, and their income level and in average or general. So for me, I think based on my research, just as Dr. Chen just mentioned, what we can do is to provide evidence-based knowledge and to remind the policymaker and remind probably all of the scholars in gerontology around the world that something is important or something is missing in the current focus. And because my previous study largely focused on person with disability, no matter living in community or in long-term care facility. So I'm particularly concerned that the current index and the current concept of active agent, probably healthy agent or successful agent, they are not perfectly fit for certain older population, and those population are just that's been focused or very little attention has been paid, and they are probably even more vulnerable, especially in this kind of pandemic area. So my suggestion will be provide empirical evidence and to support that something is missing, or the general theory framework probably not fit for all the population, and for some of them, there might be spatial intervention or spatial treatment needed. And for Taiwan's case, we in recent years, like in the at least 5 years, because we launched long-term care 2.0, and most of the focus, especially policy and the discussion, focus more on person with long-term care needs. And for my perspective, and in long-term care perspective, you always treat all the person with disability as a patient, need to be rehabbed, or can be recovered if they are able to recover. So we have a lot of health promotion programs and services, try to make them stay healthy. That kind of healthy means probably to perform like a self-care test. But that's why I want to do this research. That's because activity and the environment, they are actually just, I want to focus on like person-centered. A person is not just can be divided into different environment and different activity. That person is just surrounded by all of those activities and environment that person perform and embedded. So my suggestion would be like treating that person as a whole, instead of doing this, develop different kind of index to measure if you are active or not, and try to make that person's voice heard and to listen to that kind of person. I don't even think the stakeholder can set out for those kind of population, and to hear their voice and see what we can do for them. I think that's what will be the key and my suggestion.